They put a chain through the bumper of my truck and padlocked it to the mailbox before I'd even finished the last box right there in front of my new porch, like some scene out of those TV courtroom shows. Only it was real, and I was standing in the dust, holding a coffee can of old nails and wondering how my life narrowed down to a piece of rusted metal. I remember the first 3 words I told myself. Not again. Not now. And then her voice cut through, calm as if she was reading from the rules binder she carried around like holy scripture. "You can't leave until you settle the community assessment," she said, like she owned the road. That was Lorraine Voss, president of the Meadow Ridge Homeowners Association, and the day she locked my truck was the day grief stopped being personal and started being a whole goddamn war. My name's Hank Mercer. I was 58, 2 years into the slow ache of losing Maggie, my wife, the kind of slow grief that rearranges furniture in your head. We'd sold the house in the city and bought a tired cabin on the edge of an old pine ridge, thinking quiet would stitch the pieces back together. Maggie loved the land. She used to hum while she chopped kindling. Moving day should have felt like fixing something that broke. Instead, I learned I'd bought into a neighborhood whose heartbeat was managed by someone who measured power in fees and favors. Lorraine had the vest orange, with reflective stripes and a clipboard that made her posture straighter than protocol demanded. She'd been on the board for years. People called her meticulous, some called her controlling, but nobody called her a crook until I started to poke at the paper trail. She would later laugh a little too light, like a cork popping, and say she was protecting the community's interests. But when I found an invoice stapled to a fake company letterhead, charging my move-in, processing, and gate oversight, and a matching transfer to a shell account, the laugh didn't fit the math. The first act of this story is small and mean. Cones thrown across my driveway, complaints mailed to the county about a non-existent septic line, a neighbor's dog that suddenly got loose and dragged a sign into my hydrangeas. Small things until they weren't. The board sent letters that read official, stamped, and ominous, threatening fines that doubled overnight. People in Meadow Ridge started looking at me sideways, like a storm cloud had a name and it was Hank. I started keeping a notebook, dates, who said what. Every inch of paper that suggested this was less about rules and more about control. I learned about Lorraine's consultant, a woman named Brenda Malloy, through a bank slip that didn't belong in any homeowner's meeting minutes. Brenda showed up in polite dinner photos on Lorraine's social feed, and in a lot of digital breadcrumbs I wouldn't have noticed if Maggie was still alive to help me wade through the details. Maggie had done the numbers for us. She taught me how to look for patterns. In one of the top drawers I found a fat envelope stamped with Maggie's handwriting, her neat scrawl saying only, "Look here." Inside were printouts, expense claims, invoices paid to Meadow Ridge Services LLC, and a flash drive tucked like a secret. That drive became a thread I would pull until the whole sweater came apart. Then things escalated. Lorraine started making calls that smelled like smoke. One night my neighbor's porch light went dark and a truck idled at the end of the street until 2 a.m. someone nailed a notice to my door saying my property was in violation of a subdivision covenant. But when I checked county records, there was nothing. Then a phone call that made Eli, my son, look at me with a face that belonged to a different life. He's federal. Works cases nobody on the block can pronounce. And he asked one simple question. "Did you keep anything of Maggie's that looks like research?" I told him about the drive and how she'd been poking at HOA finances before she died. The pause on his end was long enough to hear the weight drop into the room. The middle of this story is where I stopped being a man who wanted to be left alone and became someone who had to act. We started with what we had: security camera footage from the neighbor across the street, timestamps that told a different story than Lorraine's narrative. The camera caught Lorraine and Brenda carrying a box inside the community office at midnight. It showed them returning the next morning, a different box leaving the building. We matched deposit dates to transfers, the little payments that feed the real machine of corruption. Mrs. Alvarez, 82 and a retired auditor, came forward with ledgers she'd saved from the old days, the kind of paper memory no one in their 30s keeps. She sat on my porch with a thermos and cookies, and when she told me, quietly, that numbers don't lie, I felt steadier than I had in months. Lorraine was an expert at theater. She could call the local paper and make herself the righteous defender of property values. She could stand at the HOA meeting podium and make a room full of homeowners clap like they'd been given back their dignity. I watched her in one of those meetings, how she tilted her head when someone dared to ask about the invoices, how she smiled and said, "We hired consultants to streamline operations," like that settled everything. But people started noticing the seams. The same consulting company registered in a different county, the same bank routing number used for construction invoices that never matched any delivered materials. The more we looked, the more the map of Meadow Ridge's money led to Lorraine's front door. There were darker moves too. Lorraine started whispering about Eli, rumors that a federal agent was stirring trouble, absurd whispers about conflict of interest. Someone slipped a dossier with anonymous accusations under Eli's car windshield. Someone else reported a phantom complaint to his office. They were trying to isolate me by making my son look like a man using his badge for family favors. That strategy is old as power. Make the defender suspect, and suddenly everyone's less likely to join in. But Eli had learned a different lesson in law enforcement. The truth is patient. He watched the evidence with the slow, professional patience of someone who has to be right in court. We set a trap that felt like a movie because sometimes truth needs a stage. We arranged a community review hearing, public, recorded, with a local reporter that hates sloppy copy and loves a headline. Lorraine thought she was going to put on another show. Instead, Eli and Mrs. Alvarez and a couple of neighbors walked in with bank statements, time-stamped camera stills, and an audio of Brenda explaining a supposed donation that matched a transfer to her private account. When the recording played, you could have heard gravel move in the back of the hall. Lorraine's face shifted from composed to thinly amused to something like a person realizing they were on a sinking ship. That moment, the live playback, is the catharsis most movies fake. Lorraine tried to flip it, to call the whole thing a setup, to point fingers and cry persecution, but the evidence was a steady, boring thing, and the public record is harder to gaslight than a room full of applause. When the county auditors arrived the next morning, it felt like the air had finally been allowed to move. Lorraine and Brenda were escorted out of the office. They protested, of course, legal teams, the obligatory statements about misunderstandings and differences in accounting practices. But the handcuffs were not a rumor. They were very real, and the charges were very real: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. The neighborhood that once clapped for Lorraine now stood in the yard, quiet as fields after harvest. You'd think that would be the end. It wasn't. There's always a ripple. Some neighbors still defended Lorraine on the grounds she'd kept our property values. Others said the system worked, the truth came out, and justice was served. But a village's healing takes longer than an arrest. People that had been fearful of retribution had to step into the light and say, "I saw this too." We formed a new temporary board, brought in independent auditors, and started the slow, boring work of fixing what had been allowed to rot. For me, the personal part of this story is quieter. I stood on my porch the morning after the arrests and drank coffee that didn't taste like victory so much as relief. I thought of Maggie, how she would have hated the spectacle, how she would have wanted me to spend my days there fixing the fence and not relitigating old wrongs. But I also thought of the flash drive and the way her curiosity saved a neighborhood from letting one person turn rules into a racket. There's a strange comfort in seeing an ugly thing exposed. It's not justice that heals, exactly, but clarity. I tell this story because a lot of people think HOAs are about paint colors and lawn heights. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're about who gets to decide what a neighborhood becomes. Power gravitates toward people who like control, and when that power isn't watched, it gets creative. Meadow Ridge is better now because a few people decided to look closer, because an old auditor kept her ledgers, because my son, who I worried would drag my pain into his life, chose to be steady rather than angry. That's the heart of it. Community is a bunch of people agreeing to hold each other accountable, and when we fail at that, we get Lorraine Voss. I don't have a tidy moral wrapped in ribbon. The cabin still needs paint. The committee still has to repair the damage to trust. But there's a new sign at the entrance, one the community designed together, that reads, "Owned by the people who live here." It's small. It's a start. If you ever find yourself on the edge of a place where someone's rules feel like a noose, pay attention. Keep records. Talk to the neighbors. Listen to the person who keeps the old receipts. Tell me what you think. Was Lorraine a villain acting alone, or a symptom of something bigger? Should homeowners associations exist with this much power? Drop a comment, tell me a time your neighborhood drew a line in the sand, or if you think we should have left it alone. If this story landed for you, Share it with someone who lives in an HOA or who thinks rules are always righteous. I'll read every comment, I promise, and we'll talk about what justice looks like when it's messy and human.